Good morning, students. I hope that all of you are doing well. Okay, students, we are going to start a new chapter today, The Revolt of 1857. I want you to open your books also. In class 8th history, we are doing a story that a English East India Company came as a trading company in India. We have already learned how did they acquire right over the territories of India, how did they administer it, what kind of revenue policies they implement, what kind of annexation policies they devised in India, right? We have already learned that why kings, nawabs, queens, farmers, artisans, they were angry with British. Even the sepoys also, Indian sepoys which were in British army, why they were dissatisfied, why they were angry with British, right? So all of them were against British due to the policies, due to the exploitative policies introduced by British in India, right? So only these were the causes which initiated the revolt of 1857. Actually, it was started, as a sepoy mutiny, but slowly people, other persons, they also joined this revolt, right? So, this revolt shook the British Empire to its foundation. Right, as I already told you, it started as a military revolt, as a sepoy mutiny, but the causes were deeply rooted in the nature of British rule in India. That what kind of rule they were doing, what kind of policies they were introducing, right? So, it drew its strength from grave discontent, which was a direct consequence of an oppressive alien rule in India. Right? So there were many causes which were responsible for this revolt, for the people's dissatisfaction, right? So let's start from your book now. The period from 1757 till 1857 saw the extension of British power and economic exploitation. In this rule only, these annexation policies, doctrine of lapse, subsidiary alliance, they were implemented. Farmers, they were forced to grow commercial crops and, to give revenue to British. And the revenue collection policies, they were also very oppressive, right? It created the Indian ruling elite and masses, which resulted in several local uprisings. So small revolt also were occurred. By the mid 19th century, regional nawabs and kings, they lost their authority. In the rural areas, both the peasants and the zamindars were unhappy due to the revenue policies with the system of revenue collection. The revolt of 1857 was a culmination of the rising wave of antagonism against the British rule. Antagonism, it's written already, feeling of hatred and opposition, and culmination means climax, you can say. It shook the foundations of British rule. Seen by some historians as the first war of independence, the revolt of 1857 was the result of certain deep rooted causes. The immediate cause was provided by Indian soldiers. They initiated this revolt. Let's take a look at the causes of the revolt. So, political causes, already you know about doctrine of lapse and subsidiary alliance, that why Indian kings, why Nawabs, they were unhappy. Let's read about them again. The expansionist policies and intentions of British created a sense of fear, suspicion, and resentment among the rulers of Indian states. Lord Dalhousie's policy of doctrine of lapse was resented by ruling class because it curbed their rights of adoption. Annexation of Jhansi, Satara, Nagpur under doctrine created great resentment. The Hindus as well as Muslims were against British due to annexation of Awadh, because most of the Indian sepoys which joined British army, they belonged to Awadh, and you know that Awadh was annexed by British on pretext of misgovernance, right? So that's why sepoys who belonged to Awadh, they were angry with British. As a result of annexation, the rulers were forced to disband the soldiers. Disrespect shown by the British to the last Mughal emperor Bahadur Shah also angered some people. The British excluded the Indians from high civil and military jobs which were reserved for the Englishmen also. So they faced discrimination also. In the army, the highest post which an Indian could get was that of a subedar at rupees 60 or 70 per month. So their salary was also low, and there were no chance of promotion. The highest post in the civil services for which an Indian could qualify was that of a Sadar Amin, who was paid rupees 500 a month. The educated Indians felt dissatisfied as they had hoped to get more employment in the government jobs. You see the people who are clearing the IAS exam, right? So if they are getting the civil services exam, so if they are getting very low salary and they have to face a discrimination also, that they were obviously be dissatisfied, right? Now let's talk about economic causes. When we're talking about economic causes, it means related to money. So here we will talk about the revenue policies which were initiated by British, like permanent settlement was there, Reotwadi system was there, Mahalwadi system was there, right? So the primary motive of the political domination of India by British was its economic exploitation. The British utilized their political power for exploiting the economic resources and wealth of India for the benefit of Britain. In this process, it created widespread discontentment, dissatisfaction. The trade interest of the British resulted in destruction of Indian cottage industries, because in the 18th century, machines were introduced in England, right? Industries were developed. So they started making clothes with machine, and they were taking raw materials from India at very low price, and they were selling the finished goods, the finished clothes in India at a high prices. But comparatively, with Indian, cloth, that cloth was cheap and of good quality also, as it was made from machine. So this way, the Indian handicraft was totally ruined. The revenue policies of the British destroyed the self sufficient village economy with its emphasis on commercialization of agriculture. Indian peasants, weavers, craftsmen were forced to work according to the desires of servants of company, and in return received very little remuneration. For this, commercialize of agriculture was a good example. People, they were forced to grow indigo, right? So contracts were signed by indigo planters and peasants, and they were getting very less, or remuneration or salary in return, right? Machine made products from England flooded the Indian markets and created unemployment among artisans and craftsmen, which I already explained. The ruination of the Indian industry increased pressure on agriculture, which led to further deterioration of conditions of peasants and people in general. So, Indian industry was ruined. So people who were earlier working in Indian industry, so they became dependent on agriculture, right? So this way, pressure was created on agriculture, right? About political and economic causes. Now let's talk about social and religious causes. A serious cause of discontentment among all classes of Indians was that they became apprehensive, you can say that, worried or afraid of the intentions of British concerning their religion. Some of the reasons for their suspicion and distrust included these. So, first, the Charter Act of 1813 had allowed the missionaries to enter India, Christian missionaries, which can preach the Christian religion, which can, spread the Christian religion in India. Many Indians feared that English were attempting to convert them all to Christianity. Hindus and Muslims, they were feeling that their religion was in danger. They believed that activities of Christian missionaries will would lead them to convert to Christianity, right? certain laws passed by companies government, including useful social legislation like the abolition of sati, female infanticide, and encouragement of widow remarriage, were considered as unnecessary interferences by the British in social customs of Indian society. Actually, what happened, British, they believed that there were many evils, many bad things in the Indian society, like practice of sati was there, widows, they were not allowed to remarry, right? So that's why they passed some laws to stop all these evils. Although these reforms were for the benefit of Indians, but Indians began to feel that the British were destroying their social customs and their traditional way of life, right? The feeling of people were hurt further by the taxes that were imposed upon the land on which temples and mosques were built. The British generally looked down upon the Indians and considered them to be inferior. They believed themselves superior and Indians inferior. And this attitude also fueled resentment against them. Now, next were military causes. Indian sepoys who were in British Army, they were also dissatisfied with British because their salary was low and there was no chances for promotion for them, right? So many acts were passed against them. They were not allowed to wear the religious marks, right? So many things were there which made them dissatisfied. Let's talk about them. So the sepoys